Hi everyone, so today we're going to be talking about the history of the Unokubi-zukuri katanas. So to start with, what is an Unokubi-zukuri katana? Unokubi-zukuri is a sword shape, and it comes from the three words: U being the cormorant, as in the bird, no being a possessive particle, and kubi being neck. So Unokubi-zukuri literally means cormorant's neck shape, sword shape. And if you've ever seen a cormorant, then they've got this weird scoop in the back of their neck, and I think that that's what it's referring to. Because in the Unokubi-zukuri, then it's in the distal third or more depending on your type, then there's a scoop out of the spine done to reduce some weight, and then it thickens back out at the kissaki. There's an example over here. So the main advantage of this is weight reduction, because you've removed material from both sides of the spine, made it a little bit lighter. But it comes at a cost. The main cost is that you've created a weak spot because you've removed some material. In modern materials it probably doesn't matter that much. But the other issue is that you've brought all of the weight distribution back towards the handle. So in the normal katana, then the weight distribution is quite far out to the tip, so it gives it a lot of cutting power. Now that you remove some of the weight from the tip, then it brings the weight distribution back towards the handle, and so that it makes it cut maybe a little bit less efficiently. The other thing is that it handles differently because of that new weight distribution, and so then for some people who are very used to the weight distribution of a normal katana, then they might say that it feels wrong or it feels different. Now in history, as a katana, then the Unokubi-zukuri shape is basically absent up until the 16th century. It generally just wasn't done. So how did they come around? Well, to answer this we have to talk about the naginata. So the naginata is a pole arm, which is a nice pole, and then it's got a curved cutting blade on the top. And so in the 1100s to the 1300s, 1400s, then these were quite common, and they were generally made as either Unokubi-zukuri or kanmuri-otoshi-zukuri. Now, kanmuri-otoshi-zukuri is more or less the same as Unokubi-zukuri, but rather than the blade thickening back out at the kissaki, then it stays thin. Now, the naginata, the reason why they're made in Unokubi-zukuri or kanmuri-otoshi-zukuri is because you've got this giant piece of metal up high on a long pole, so to weight reduce and bring that weight balance a little bit closer to your hands makes it a little bit more maneuverable, as well as because it's on a pole arm, then the cutting ability is great because you've got two hands, nice long pole to swing it with, so the cutting ability loss doesn't really matter. Now in the 1400s, then the katana took favour. Naginata and tachi generally fell out of favour, and the katana came in vogue, if you'd say. So naginata were reshaped to become either katana or wakizashi, and they did this by taking out the blade of the naginata and then trimming off the tang to shorten it, as well as clipping off the tip. The reason for that is because naginata are very curved, and so then it's a little bit too much of a curve for a katana or a wakizashi. So by taking a horizontal cut at the tip, then you've reshaped the tip to look like a katana or a wakizashi. Now what this essentially does is, whether the naginata is made as Unokubi-zukuri or kanmuri-otoshi-zukuri, then by cutting off that tip, then you've created a thinning in the spine, and then it flares back out at the kissaki, and you created it being Unokubi-zukuri, either as a katana or a wakizashi. So these swords are referred to as naginata-naoshi swords, and that literally means that it is a fixed or reshaped naginata. So in the mid to late 1500s, then naginata-naoshi style swords became popular. Now these aren't naginata-naoshi swords, these are naginata-naoshi style swords which were made to look like that style. And the reason is because people thought Unokubi-zukuri looked quite aesthetically pleasing, it looked good. And so then hence Unokubi-zukuri katanas came about. Now this trend didn't just stay in Japan, it moved all the way to Korea, where if we have a look at some of the most famous Korean swords, Admiral Yi Sun-shin's swords, he's got twin swords that were about 194 centimeters long, which is incredibly, they're huge, and they're currently kept at Gyeongcheongsa Temple in Asan, South Korea. Now while Unokubi-zukuri swords weren't a thing pre-1500s, then there's another sort of sword that actually was, that looks quite similar, and that is the kissaki-moroha zukuri katana. Moroha-zukuri means that it's a sword that looks like a katana, but it's double-edged. Both the front edge and the back edge are both sharpened. Now, kissaki-moroha-zukuri means that only the kissaki end, or the distal third, is done double-edged. And so these swords, then, they look very similar to Unokubi-zukuri, but they're a double-edged sword towards the tip. And while most of them probably aren't called kissaki-moroha-zukuri swords, they might well be known as kogarasumaru style swords. And this is paid as a tribute to a special sword called kogarasumaru, which was a family treasure of the Taira family since the 12th century, and it was made in this style. Now people ask, well, if kogarasumaru style swords were a thing, why weren't Unokubi-zukuri? Because they're quite similar, and it's probably due to their difference in functionality. So in Unokubi-zukuri, then you've reduced the weight, and that's the only advantage that you bring. The disadvantage that you bring are the weak point, because you've taken out the material. Now in kissaki-moroha-zukuri, or kogarasumaru style, then you still reduce the weight, but you also add a sharp edge to it. So probably the mindset behind it is, if I'm going to reduce that weight and create this stress point, then I may as well have a sharp edge there to make up for it. So that's all for today. It's just there talking about the history of the Unokubi-zukuri katana. I think an important thing to keep in mind is that there was no functional reason for them to be made. In history, they were just made for aesthetic purposes. So if you're planning to buy one, then that might be something to keep in mind. Well, hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time.